The convoy crept into the Raven Hills with engines grumbling against the steep gradient, each truck weighed down by crates of relief supplies. The mountains rose sharp and jagged, their ridges splintering into rock and shale. Dust clung to the boots of the SEALs as they moved alongside the column, rifles carried at the ready. They cut purposeful figures in combat gear, plates strapped tight, visors catching the gray light. Among them walked Elena Marquez, her small frame dwarfed by the men who dismissed her as dead weight. She carried the 35-pound medic bag across her shoulders, the strap biting into her collarbone, and trailed a few steps behind the rest so she would not slow their pace. Her uniform bore the medic insignia at the shoulder, a clear marker that she was not there to fight but to keep others breathing. The men never let her forget it. One muttered that the bag looked heavier than she was. Another asked how someone so slight would ever haul a stretcher. The jokes were not cruel in volume, only sharp enough to cut. They assumed she did not hear. She did. Yet her face remained composed, long brown hair tied neatly back, eyes fixed on the path ahead. She carried herself like silence was its own answer, though each remark pressed her further into the shadows of the group. The road twisted between boulders, narrow enough that the convoy slowed almost to walking speed. The tension in the air was not yet fear, only the awareness that Raven Hills had never been kind ground. When the first crack of gunfire snapped across the slope, the SEALs reacted instantly. Rifles lifted, shouts rising as they dove for cover. Dust and rock burst around them as enemy fire cascaded down from hidden ridges. The convoy lurched to a halt, drivers ducking low as bullets pelted the steel frames. Elena moved without panic. She dropped behind a wheel well and tugged her medic bag forward, hands already searching for bandages and tourniquets. A young SEAL cursed loudly as blood streamed from his arm. She dragged him clear of the open ground, her shoulders straining under his weight, then pressed her palm hard against the wound to stem the flow. Her gloves darkened, but her expression did not waver. The soldier groaned, demanding she hurry, but her calm pace held as she wrapped and tied, each movement efficient. Another man staggered back from the firefight, clutching his side. Elena pivoted to him, triaging quickly, her hands stained crimson as she worked. Bullets clanged against the truck frame above her, sparks skittering, yet she never ducked or froze. The medic insignia on her shoulder caught the dusty light as if to remind everyone what her purpose was. To the men she looked too fragile, too quiet. But she stitched order into chaos one patient at a time. Her calm under fire did not match the frail outline they had mocked. The seed of suspense was planted in that moment, though none of them yet recognized it. Elena's silence was not weakness. It was resolve forged out of sight, waiting for the hour when it would matter most. The fight in Raven Hills grew fiercer with each passing second. The first crack of rifle fire had been sharp, but now it rolled into a steady roar, echoing between the stone walls that loomed over the convoy. Grenades burst along the ridge, sending fragments of rock and dust down onto the stalled vehicles. The SEALs answered with disciplined volleys, shouting orders as they scrambled for better positions. Bullets struck the steel of the lead truck, clanging like hammers against an anvil. Shards of gravel peppered the ground where Elena Marquez knelt, yet her hands moved with the same composure she would have shown in an aid station far from the front. One man collapsed beside her, blood pumping from his leg where shrapnel had torn through the muscle. She pressed a tourniquet tight, cinched the strap until the bleeding slowed, then shifted to cover his chest with her body while another round sparked off the metal frame inches above. Her uniform was already streaked with red. Her medic insignia darkened until it nearly blended into the fabric, yet her expression never broke. She finished tying the bandage, gave the man's shoulder a brief squeeze, and then moved on to the next cry for help. The ground shook again as another grenade detonated near the convoy's rear. Smoke curled across the narrow pass, stinging eyes and cutting vision. Elena darted between two trucks, her 35-pound bag slapping against her hip. She slid to her knees beside a corporal bleeding heavily from his side and pressed her palm flat to the wound, her other hand reaching smoothly for gauze. A sergeant staggered close and stopped mid-step, staring at her in disbelief. She hadn't even flinched when the blast struck, so near. The men around her had instinctively ducked or cursed. She had not. "Stay back. This isn't your fight," another SEAL shouted over the gunfire, his voice raw with frustration as he fired upward toward the ridge. Elena did not look up from her work. She tied off the bandage, her hands steady despite the roar that shook the ground. Her reply came low, firm, and without hesitation. "I know where the shooters are." The words cut through the chaos like a sudden silence. The soldier stared at her, momentarily forgetting the fight. "How do you know that?" he demanded. But she was already moving again, pulling another wounded man behind cover. Her eyes flicked, not only to the blood she treated, but to the angles of rock above, the flashes of muzzle fire, the shifting patterns of dust. Her medic tools, slick with blood, clattered briefly as she pulled them free, yet her grip never slipped. The squad began to notice. Each path she took was measured, never reckless, never leaving her exposed for long. She looked like someone who had seen this storm many times before. Suspense hung unspoken in the air. They had mocked her silence once. Now it unsettled them, because fear had not claimed her. The blast struck close enough to lift Elena Marquez off her knees. A grenade had slammed into the rock wall behind the convoy, showering dirt and jagged fragments across the narrow pass. The force ripped her medic bag from her grip, scattering bandages and instruments across the ground. She scrambled through the smoke, coughing as she reached for it, but her eyes caught something else lying in the dust. A rifle, half buried in grit, its wooden stock scarred and dark from years of use. For a moment she hesitated. Her fingers brushed the strap of the medic kit, slick with blood and dust. That bag was the emblem of her new life, the one she had carried mile after mile to prove that healing could be her only duty. But the storm around her raged louder, bullets tearing into steel, men shouting, the convoy pinned. She reached down again, and this time her hands closed not on the medic kit, but on the rifle. The SEALs noticed immediately. One barked a short laugh, shaking his head even as he reloaded. To them, the weapon looked heavier than she was. Another shouted over the gunfire, mocking that holding it was one thing, but firing it was another. None of them expected her to rise steady. None of them expected what came next. Elena knelt, slim figure framed by drifting smoke, and raised the rifle to her shoulder. The weapon settled against her with practiced familiarity, her cheek pressed firm to the stock, her eye aligning through the iron sight as if the motion had been drilled into her bones. She inhaled once, the world narrowing to the faint shapes moving along the ridge above. Then she squeezed the trigger. The crack split through the roar. An enemy fighter fell instantly. The SEAL closest to her stopped mid-shout, eyes widening. She adjusted by a fraction, fired again, another target crumpling out of sight. A third shot followed, crisp and clean, the echo cutting off as smoke swallowed the ridge. 3 shots, 3 men down. For a heartbeat, the battlefield seemed to pause. The squad froze, weapons half lowered, their disbelief written in the sudden silence between bursts of gunfire. Dust rained down around them, smoke curled into shifting walls, and in the center of it knelt the medic they had dismissed as frail, holding a rifle with perfect control. No one spoke. The air carried only the faint ring of the shots still fading across the hills. Elena lowered the barrel slightly, her breathing calm, then let the rifle rest against her knee. Her medic kit lay abandoned in the dirt where she had first reached for it. The choice was clear, and it had stunned the squad into silence. Suspense that had hung like a blade now transformed into shock. Respect, unspoken but undeniable, had begun. Elena Marquez did not pause after the last shot echoed away. She lowered the rifle with the same steady motion she had used to lift it, set it against the wheel of the truck, and reached again for her scattered medic supplies. The bag was torn at the seam, but she gathered what she needed without wasted motion. A tourniquet, gauze, a field dressing. The shift was seamless, as though firing with precision and binding wounds came from the same muscle memory. Blood streaked her fingers. But they did not shake. She pressed firm against a corporal's chest wound, her voice low and steady as she told him to keep breathing. The SEALs nearby exchanged uneasy glances. Their disbelief was still raw. The silence between bursts of gunfire carrying questions no one dared yet voice aloud. Then the sniper of the squad leaned closer, his face hardened by years of experience. His eyes lingered on the neat grouping where her shots had struck. "That's not basic training," he muttered. The words slipped out with more certainty than curiosity, and several men turned their heads toward him. Elena said nothing. She tied off the bandage and shifted to the next casualty. Yet her awareness stretched beyond the wounded in front of her. She glanced toward the ridgeline and gave a quick order for covering fire to the left. 2 SEALs obeyed instinctively, laying down rounds that pinned an enemy fighter who had been seconds from flanking them. They looked back at her in surprise, realizing she had seen the danger before anyone else. The rhythm of her work fell into a strange pattern. She knelt in the dust with bloodied bandages spread across her knees, then rose suddenly to lift the rifle and fire another precise shot into the smoke above. Each movement was measured, disciplined, efficient. She fired with the poise of someone who had drilled it for years, then returned to compressing a wound or securing an airway without hesitation. Her figure, small and steady, became the quiet center around which chaos turned. Whispers began to ripple through the squad. One SEAL muttered to another that her stance on the rifle was textbook, not the clumsy grip of a medic firing in panic. Another noted the way she breathed before squeezing the trigger, steady and controlled, the mark of long practice. The disbelief that had stunned them minutes earlier now shifted into suspicion, sharpened by awe. Who was she really? The symbols of her 2 worlds lay side by side, blood-stained bandages piled at her feet, and beside them the rifle leaned against the truck, smoke curling faintly from its barrel. To the squad, the sight carried a weight they could not reconcile. She was both healer and killer. Her silence, broken only by the orders she gave when she saw threats others missed. Extraordinary skill cannot remain hidden forever. It leaks through in the smallest cracks, in the calmest decisions, in the rhythm of breath that reveals training far beyond what is written in a file. The hills erupted with new fire as enemy reinforcements poured down the slopes. Shadows moved through the smoke, rifles flashing, voices carrying above the roar. The convoy, already battered, felt the noose tighten. Ammunition belts dwindled, rifles clicked dry, and every blast of a grenade seemed closer than the last. Dirt rained down in heavy sheets, choking the narrow pass with grit that coated mouths and eyes. The SEALs fought hard, but their formation frayed under the relentless pressure. In the middle of it all, Elena Marquez shifted without hesitation. One moment she fired the rifle with steady precision, a clean shot cracking across the ridge to silence a machine gun nest. The next moment she was on her knees, blood soaking into her sleeves as she clamped a wound and wrapped gauze around a soldier's shoulder. Her movements were seamless, almost impossibly fast, switching between healer and fighter with no wasted breath. The rifle leaned against a tire beside her, its barrel still warm, and at her feet lay a growing pile of bloodied bandages. The 2 symbols of her divided self rested side by side, undeniable proof that both halves belonged to her. The squad began to fracture. Fear cut through their discipline, and disbelief lingered in their glances toward Elena. The SEAL leader forced his way through the dust, crouching near her while she pressed hard on a corporal's chest wound. His eyes burned with more than urgency. "Who are you really?" "Marquez," he demanded, voice low but sharp enough to carry. "Your file says medic, but what I'm seeing out here says something else." Elena tied off the bandage, jaw tight, but before she could speak, the ridge exploded again with suppressive fire. The leader ducked, swearing, while she reached for the rifle and rose to her feet in one fluid motion. She sighted downrange, exhaled, and struck the enemy gunner who had been pinning them. The man dropped, and the squad found a window to move. Her voice rang out over the chaos. sharper than any command they had received from above. She directed 2 men to shift left and secure cover. She ordered another pair to ration their magazines, telling them which arcs to watch. Her instructions were precise, efficient, impossible to ignore. The squad obeyed almost instinctively, realizing that she was seeing the fight clearer than anyone. She placed herself at the center, balancing the rifle against her shoulder, then crouched again to stabilize a bleeding arm without breaking rhythm. Around her, the SEALs traded quick, uncertain looks. Their medic was running the defense, and she was doing it better than any of them. The smoke thickened, the fire pressed harder, and still she stood firm, alternating between surgical bandages and surgical shots. Suspense tightened like a cord. The truth about her could not stay hidden much longer. Yet in that moment, no one cared. Survival demanded a leader, and Elena had become one. The enemy's final push struck like a hammer. Mortar fire slammed into the slopes above, showering the convoy with rock. Machine guns raked the pass from 3 angles at once, their bursts stitching sparks across steel and stone. The SEALs pressed low, rifles nearly dry, faces streaked with sweat and grit. Desperation hung thick, the kind that made men wonder if they would live past the next minute. In the middle of that storm, Elena Marquez lifted her rifle again. Her breathing stayed calm, steady as she scanned through the smoke. A glint caught her eye high on the ridge, barely visible against the fractured rock. She exhaled, squeezed, and the sniper hidden there toppled before his shot could fire. Another flicker, another target, her rounds landing with surgical precision. It was not the frantic rhythm of survival fire. Every shot was measured, deliberate, devastating. At ranges where others saw only haze, she picked out enemies as if they were marked for her alone. The squad began to whisper, disbelief raw in their voices even as they fired beside her. No one without elite training could have struck targets so far, so consistently. Each grouping on the ridge spoke of years of practiced mastery, of knowledge they had never imagined belonging to the medic they once mocked. One SEAL muttered that no basic training could ever teach that control. Another swore he had seen her adjust for wind without even glancing at an instrument. The truth crept through a third squad. Current, impossible to ignore. The leader crouched beside her, his expression a mix of awe and suspicion. "Enough games. Marquez," he said, his voice carrying above the gunfire. "Who are you really?" Elena reloaded calmly, the click of the bolt sliding home louder than the question itself. She finished the motion, fired one more round that silenced an enemy gunner, and then lowered the rifle. Slowly, deliberately, she pulled off her blood-stained gloves. Beneath the grime of battle, her wrist bore a faded tattoo. The ink had blurred with years, but the image was still clear, the insignia of Kraken Unit. The squad froze. Every face turned toward her, eyes widening as the symbol sank in. The whispers turned to stunned silence, then to quiet recognition. They all knew the stories. Kraken, the unit whispered about in restricted files, the one said to hold impossible sniper records. And there, kneeling in the dust, was their medic, the mark etched into her skin. One soldier breathed the words as if afraid to say them aloud. The ghost of Kandahar. His voice trembled with equal parts fear and reverence. Elena met their eyes, her own steady, unflinching. "Another lifetime," she said. Suspense broke into revelation, the truth no longer deniable. The quiet medic who carried bandages in silence was the same legend who once carried impossible distances inside her scope. Truth cannot stay buried forever, and even the smallest figure in the shadows may hold a past that changes everything. Elena Marquez no longer moved in the shadows of doubt. With the truth exposed, the squad shifted unconsciously toward her. their eyes seeking her in every lull between bursts of fire. The hills had become a board of shifting pieces, and she directed it with the calm of someone who had studied every move before the first shot was fired. She crouched behind the axle of a truck, rifle balanced against her shoulder, then rose just enough to fire. A single round cut across the pass and struck a gunman in the arm, disabling him without ending his life. Her knowledge of anatomy guided the shot as surely as any rangefinder. She set the weapon aside for only seconds, long enough to kneel beside a wounded sergeant whose breathing faltered. Her hands, streaked with blood, worked as efficiently as they had at the start of the ambush. She opened an airway, secured it, and pressed his shoulder reassuringly before lifting the rifle again. It was as if two identities, sniper and medic, existed not in conflict but in harmony. Her bandages lay beside spent casings, her gloves beside a barrel steaming from the last burst of fire. The squad began to rally. Under her direction, they no longer scrambled in desperate circles but moved with coordinated precision. She called for one team to shift fire left, another to hold high ground, her voice firm without shouting. The men obeyed without hesitation, their trust sealed not by rank, but by results. Each order flowed seamlessly into action, and each action bought them another measure of survival. Her shots were surgical. One struck a shoulder, another a leg, always placed with uncanny awareness of the human frame. She knew where to break a grip on a weapon, where to collapse a fighter's stance without taking his life. To the squad, it looked like artistry, a rhythm of protection disguised as violence. When questioned with their eyes, she gave the only explanation she would ever offer. "It's not destruction," she said quietly, chambering another round. "It's protection." The phrase settled into the squad as they fought on, a reminder that the storm had purpose. They saw the balance in her every movement, the way she shielded a wounded man with her own body while firing past him to clear the path. They saw the conviction in her stillness, the way she refused to waste even a second of breath. Awe grew among them, not shouted but carried in glances and nods as they realized chaos was no longer devouring them. Under Elena's unseen command, it had become something controlled, deliberate, even survivable. By the time the ridge began to clear, they understood the truth fully. Her strength was not one identity or the other. It was the choice to fuse them, to wield every skill in service of life. The medic sniper had turned the tide, proving that true power was not found in destruction alone, but in the precision of knowing exactly when to heal and when to strike. When the last echo of gunfire faded across the Raven Hills, the silence felt heavier than the battle itself. Smoke drifted in ragged curtains over the convoy, curling around shattered rock and scorched metal. The SEALs lowered their rifles with hands that trembled from exhaustion rather than fear. One by one they looked toward Elena Marquez. She stood with her rifle balanced against her knee, the medic bag slung once more over her shoulder, the insignia on her uniform stained, dark, with dust and blood. The squad leader stepped forward, his voice carrying the weight of men who had survived only because of her. He told her they owed her their lives. She met his eyes steadily and replied that they should remember her only as the medic who kept them alive. They pressed her with words of apology and respect, but she shook her head. There was no ceremony in her bearing, no victory claimed. To Elena, the fight was already past, the work unfinished. When reinforcements arrived and secured the pass, she moved among the wounded, giving water, tightening bandages, and checking pulses. Her Kraken tattoo, glimpsed in the storm of battle, was hidden once more beneath her sleeve. The men who had seen it said nothing. They understood now that some truths were not meant for open discussion. Back at base, the rhythm of her life resumed as though nothing had changed. She stacked medical supplies in neat rows, repaired torn packs, and instructed new medics on how to handle triage under fire. Her hands moved as calmly as they had on the ridge. Only now they held tape and gauze instead of a rifle. To the fresh recruits, she seemed like any other quiet figure in the infirmary, a woman content to keep her head low and her work steady. Yet the veterans of Raven Hills carried a different memory, and their whispers began to travel farther than official reports ever would. In the dining hall, one SEAL leaned across the table to a group of newcomers and told them to show respect to the woman who walked the halls with a medic bag on her shoulder. Another, in a hushed tone, shared that she had once silenced an entire ridgeline alone. The name Ghost of Kandahar surfaced, not shouted but murmured like a prayer. No one dared ask her if it was true. The power of the legend lay not in confirmation but in the quiet certainty that the medic they dismissed had revealed herself when it mattered most. Elena never acknowledged the stories. When asked directly, she spoke only of the soldiers who survived and the wounds that healed. To her, strength was not measured by how many lives she had taken, but by the ones she had chosen to protect. She lived that truth each day, in silence, content to let respect grow where disbelief once lingered. The overlooked had become legend, not by seeking it, but by refusing to.